like a fight within the mafia itself for who's going to be the capo di tutti capo. And Hitler comes out supreme. And at the same time, everything was coming under Nazi control. Political parties were abolished. The labor unions were abolished. Sports had to come under the control of the Reich, and that included gun clubs. And there were a lot of independent gun clubs. Some of them had been in existence for hundreds of years in Germany. And if they refused to make their leaders of the club Nazi members, then the club president and the vice president, all that, these people would be arrested and taken into Gestapo custody. So this is in the period of forcing into the line, or Gleichschaltung, in which all elements of society were being taken within the Nazi way of life and the National Socialist agenda. So we go through that period, and at the same time you start having a lot more focus on getting at the Jews and how horrible they are. And here's our friend Werner Best, and he's the one who authored the 1931 Boxheimer document, which talked about the execution of persons who were gun owners who didn't turn them in within 24 hours if there was a Nazi takeover. He was actually he had a law degree, he had some kind of judicial office, and when the Nazis came to power, he became the chief legal advisor of the Gestapo, the secret state police. And in that role, he had quite a policy making role. One of his documents about gun ownership for Jews we'll look at a little bit closer in a minute. But he was involved in getting the J stamp put on Jewish identities and passports, and he was involved after the war began. He was sent first to France and then to Denmark. In 1931, when the war began, every country not occupied by the Nazis, they had a policy of putting up posters and saying, you have to turn in your firearms within 24 hours or you'll be executed. That's exactly from the same document from 1931 that he personally had authored. And he was in charge of those policies and others in those occupied countries. If you ever go to the museum in France, the one where Napoleon's body is, right? Well, they've got one of those original posters there that you turn in your guns within 24 hours. And you know what? They didn't put a date or a time when the clock started ticking. It just says that. And I've done a lot of, like, what, are you going to turn it in and you're 5 minutes late? And but actually I've got a lot of original records on that, and it was a decree they made throughout their occupation, and there were so many Frenchmen who wouldn't go by it that they kept just publishing it over and over in the paper. You've got 24 hours. The next day you got 24 hours, and they actually did start executing a lot of people. That's also in the newspapers. And then the French were so bad about turning in their guns that there came a time when the Wehrmacht commander in Paris said, we're not going to publish the names anymore, we're just going to shoot these people. So that's another subject, but Werner Best was in charge of some of those programs. And we'll return to him in a moment. Actually, this is probably a good moment because I think that's the document that's next. So this is a document authored by Werner Best. The Gestapo in Stettin had asked about issuing gun permits to Jews. This was dated December 1935, because there was never any decree or law against Jewish possession of guns in Germany until at the time of Kristallnacht. And we'll look at that documentation in a few minutes. But in this Werner Best advises that the Jewish people are a considerable danger to the German people. And, nothing had happened. In Germany itself, the German Jews had done nothing. There were no assassinations, no attacks on the Nazis. They had a central association we'll talk about in a minute that tried their best to alleviate the harsher and harsher conditions. But he's making this policy statement that you have to look at the political reliability, and in most cases we don't think Jews are politically reliable, meaning that they're not Nazi supporters, and therefore you have to be very careful about issuing gun permits to Jews, and basically he's advising don't do it, and it's got to be basically approved by Gestapo officials. You're not just going to, the local police are not going to just issue these permits. And so this was from the Gestapo, and this was addressed to the Gestapo and the Stapo, which is part of a kind of underling of the Gestapo, and to all the other relevant police agencies. So here you have nothing had changed in the law. The Jews were eligible for the gun permits. But one thing, going back to the Weimar law, to get a permit to acquire a gun or to carry a gun, you had to meet certain criteria. You had to be trustworthy. So anybody who was considered untrustworthy by the authorities, you don't get your gun permit. So they had a discretionary issuance, as we would call it today. And so I think it shows you the danger of language like that if you have subjective language that allow authorities to decide who gets a permit, as opposed to objective criteria like convicted felon, mental incompetent, things like that. So this is Werner Best. Just another footnote on him was there had been a Nazi turncoat who had revealed that Boxheimer document from 1931, and when the Nazis came to power, Best had that guy arrested, and he was mysteriously killed while trying to escape. And so he was tried in some of the Nuremberg cases, and he was not executed, but he was in prison for a while and lived to tell the tale. But he did have the guy murdered that had revealed those documents. So now we move on to getting toward 1938. As time, well, we'll come back then. As time went on, the economic screws were tightening. Jewish assets were being confiscated, and conditions were getting very harsh. This was before the Star of David had to be worn. That was later, but Jews who could get out were doing so. There were many who they considered themselves Germans, and many of them very conservative German patriots, and they were not about to leave. They thought there would be an end to this at some point. So, but we come to a time when conditions were getting very bad. In September and October of 1938, this would not be revealed until Kristallnacht, but there was a disarming of Jews going on by the authorities. And again, some of the people I've got in the book you've never heard of, but they were famous Nazi officials at the time. And the guy over here you recognize, that's Himmler. This is the police president of Berlin named Helsdorf. And he's going to figure prominently in this story. He would orchestrate the disarming of the Berlin Jews in September, October 1938. And he had quite an interesting experience in terms of he had been in the SA. He was a really gung-ho Nazi. He was heavily involved in disarming the Jews in 1938. But when Kristallnacht came, as police president, he strongly objected to those kind of tactics because basically Hitler unleashed these brown shirts to go wild in the streets. That's not the kind of thing that a police chief would appreciate. But he was not in Berlin at the time. He was in Munich. 1944, Helsdorf had joined the opposition to Hitler, and when the bomb attack took place in July 20, 1944, and it was Stauffenberg and his conspirators were exposed and rounded up. Helsdorf was part of that conspiracy, and he would be one of those who would be tried at the trials that took place after that, and then hung by piano wire, and so he met an honorable end. But that was the case with, I guess, some of the opposition to Hitler. They had been part of the Nazi Party and a lot of the bad things that it did, but then they came around to a point where, whether it was because they had had enough of the oppression of the Jews or because Hitler was like becoming an idiot, couldn't win the war, we're going to get him. We just passed the 70th anniversary just 4 days ago of July 20, 1944 to 2014, quite a historic day of when the bomb went off, and unfortunately some idiot had moved it away from Hitler and didn't kill him. But Hellsdorf plays a prominent role in the disarming of the German Jews, and here we have an article from November the 9th of 1938. And this article, it was not published that they were disarming the Jews until, I think it was November the 8th. There was a Polish Jewish teenager who walked into the German embassy in Paris and shot a German diplomat. Not a very high-up official at all, but it was just the kind of event that the Nazi regime could latch on to justify what it was about to do. It could be, the conventional story was that this young teenager, Herschel Greenspun, had relatives who were Polish Jews, and they were deported from Germany, and they were in really oppressive conditions and whatever. Was he trying to get revenge for that, or was he himself manipulated by Nazi agents so that a Jew would kill somebody and then they would have the excuse to launch the pogrom that came next, Reichskristallnacht or Night of the Broken Glass? But the article talks about in the last few weeks. It doesn't give a starting date. Jews are being disarmed. Antwaffen der Berliner Juden, disarming the German Jews. It tells you they've supposedly seized 2,569 hand weapons, 1,702 Schusswaffen or guns, and 20,000 cartridges. What kind of bureaucrat do you have to be to like count cartridges? I don't know. But, and it goes on to explain that the Jews, it had been made emphatically known to the Jews in Berlin, they have to turn in their guns and other weapons, and who knows what they considered to be a hand weapon, like a letter opener or a dagger would be, but it was made known to them, the article states, by, I suspect, putting up notices in the Jewish quarters in Berlin, maybe word of mouth. We do know that they had the records on all gun owners, Jewish gun owners. Berlin had registration, and that the Nazis had information on, in Germany at that time, when you were born, they would put down in the records whether you were Jewish, Protestant, Catholic. So they had all these records they could correlate. And so the notice was given to them, and the article says that some of them we had to use harsher means to let them know because they weren't turning them in. And curiously, it says that those without licenses were required to turn them in, but the order went out for all of them to turn them in. And we have that documented because we're going to get to an instance next that exemplifies the fact that all of them were required to turn in their guns. So this was published. It was the first notice to the world that the Jews were being disarmed in Germany, and this was summarized and published in the New York Times and other papers, prominent papers in the U.S., Britain, countries like that.